Destructive fires around the edges of the Los Angeles Basin and elsewhere in California have become commonplace in recent years. Once started, they consume everything in their paths, including houses and other structures. Smoke and debris degrade the already poor air quality. Some of them are so hot they damage the very seed bed from which new life might grow, even burn the seed itself. When it's all over, damages are totaled and paid, cause is determined, and rehabilitation is decided upon. Later on, the rainy season brings new damage as the burned-off hillsides erode and unused water floods the lowlands. Is there any way to break the cycle that ends this way, or even to intervene? Experts say there is, that in fact there can be life through fire in California. There was a time early in this century and before when fires were common in California's environment, started by natural causes. Forester Del Albright.
The difference between these early natural fires and the fires we face today is that the early fires occurred more often and kept the accumulation of fuels low. They burned with much less intensity. Today, with our knowledge of fire suppression and fire behavior, things have changed.
Indeed, they have. Today, experts believe we may have around 20 million acres of chaparral in California. Regardless of the kinds of bushes involved, it is called chaparral, from one end of the state to the other.
Much of California's plant life requires fire. Many of the trees and shrubs in our forests and rangelands need heat in order to regenerate their growth. The seeds, in some cases, need to have heat in order to break their protective coats, and in other cases, the crowns and the old vegetation needs to be burned off in order to release nutrients into the soil, which will provide the nutrition for the young plants to grow and become vigorous.
Another result of any chaparral burn is the release of water into streams. Because the greater the chaparral growth, the greater the amount of water used for that growth.
The interaction of fire and vegetation affects all wildlife. Wildlife are dependent upon vegetation as a major part of their habitat, and thus the extent to which fire changes vegetation, it shapes the nature of wildlife habitats. Modern man has changed this whole natural interaction between fire and vegetation.
People's perceptions of the beauty of forest lands led them to argue for protection against fire. We got very good at protecting wildlands from fire and suppressing fires once started. We did it to protect the beauty, then to protect investments in many of the lands that once burned regularly. The first change from complete suppression of fire in California's forest and brushlands came in the 1940s. State Ranger in charge, Jack Odgers.
Before the programs that we're into now in the 40s, the landowners, primarily the ranchers, wanted to clear their land of the brush to improve the range carrying capacity of it, and we had then what we called the range improvement control burns. Go out and put some minimal control lines, bulldozer lines around the area that they wanted burned, get the neighbors in, neighboring farmers, and have a day of a burn.
And burn they did. Thousands of acres benefited from this range improvement technique. But results were sometimes non-selective. Liability problems generally followed when fires got away and burned where they were not wanted. Because of those liability problems, landowners who were determined to do something about the chaparral problem turned to other, more expensive methods that weren't apt to land them in court. Only recently has a technique been developed that appears to limit the problems. Fire dropped by helicopter in a predetermined pattern at a season of the year better suited to control and when air pollution problems weren't nearly as great. For landowners, this still leaves the liability problem. But now that isn't a problem either.
We've got incentives now economically and knowledge to put the two together and use a sensible approach to the chaparral management program as contained in Senate Bill 1704 Keene, that gives us the authority to work with the landowner and relieves the landowner of much, if not all, of his liabilities involved while working within the confines of the program.
This is part of the Thomas Richards Ranch. 7,000 acres of grassland, pine, oak, and chaparral. The Richards place supports cattle and relatively large wildlife populations because of the diversity of terrain, habitat, and plenty of water. There are wide open parks sprinkled with oak, open areas rich in rose clover seeded after an earlier burn, along with a variety of other plant life. Streams that sometimes run all year, and ponds that supply water for stock, fish, and wildlife alike. The ranch also supports growing acreages of solid chaparral. Owner Tom Richards describes the problem.
One of the main problems you have on a ranch such as this with the growth of brush is it outgrows its usefulness insofar as wildlife is concerned, and livestock also, because there is some browsing done by livestock on brush. And with this brush growing like it does on property such as this, it also drinks a great amount of water and evaporates that out into the atmosphere. It drops its old leaves, old bark and everything, and you get decadent material beneath. And then if you did have a wildfire, it's gone, the brush is gone, and everything else is gone with it. Well, what we did in the past with our controlled burn was that we mashed some of the brush with bulldozers, cut some of the brush with chainsaws, then let that brush lie for 2 years so that you would have a good clean burn. When we found out first about the helitorch, we thought that this would be a good thing to use because of the area that we contemplated burning being so steep and rocky and the hillsides where it wouldn't be practical to use mechanical equipment such as a bulldozer or other equipment.
So Richards called a couple of people he knew could and would help. Ed Wagoner, the California Department of Forestry's district ranger, and Ed Kammerer, unit manager for the California Department of Fish and Game. Wagoner, as representative of the State Department of Forestry, is able to start the entire coordinated resource management planning project. Kammerer was called in because of Richards' special interest in wildlife habitat. And Richards explains his objectives: water production, range improvement, wildlife habitat, reduction of fuel. From here, it's a matter of planning. District Ranger Ed Wagoner is responsible for the plan and all the coordination it takes. He calls all the interested parties, public and private, assures himself that there is a public benefit to the proposed project, checks on feasibility, and in general, people and equipment needed to make it go.
The whole theory behind this project and every other project like it is to do the proper job for the type of situation that the landowner wants, and because we are a service organization.
So the work begins. Plant life identified as valuable is isolated so that it won't be burned in the upcoming fire. This digger pine has good wildlife value, and so does the madrone tree. Both of them are to be saved. The ponderosa has a future value as timber, so it's saved. As a matter of fact, prescriptions for burning can include burning up to or under trees like these in the interests of fuel management and better forest practice.
It is important for California to invest in its renewable resources like the forest and rangelands portrayed in this film in order to enhance their productivity and their usefulness to us for current generations and future generations. The Chaparral Management Program, which is a specific subject of this film, is part of a 20-year plan on a much larger scale by the Resources Agency of California called Investing for Prosperity. The Investing for Prosperity program proceeds on the theory that we as a society should use our non-renewable resources while we still have them and invest them in our renewable resources. Specifically, this program, Investing for Prosperity, uses the revenue from offshore oil
to invest in our renewable resources that ultimately will be the permanent base for our economy and our well-being. Whether the program serves to protect lives and property or to bring under better management rural brushlands, it pays real dividends in the form of better soil protection, better water quality, better fish and wildlife habitat, improvement of our forests, and of course, very important, protection against catastrophic fires in both rural and urban settings.
The fuel has been mixed and loaded into the helitorch. Then the whole thing is attached to the helicopter, and the helitorching project is underway. It's time to see that no fire gets beyond the established lines and to look over the burned areas by air for an overall look. Next, the sites are checked on the ground. At this point, the fire boss decides how many people should be left to guard against unwanted outbreaks of fire. Later, owner Tom Richards goes over the burn with wildlife biologist Kent Smith and ranger Ed Wagoner.
It's important that we get in here and make a continuous type of project, and that we burn again every 3 to 5 years and keep the mosaic effect going in and have a lot of edge in here for wildlife.
That's really important, Ed. One of the greatest values of opening up areas like this is increasing the variety of wildlife that are going to be able to utilize this area. By reburning it over a period of years, you're going to be able to maintain that openness and maintain increased wildlife diversity. In addition, the young sprouts that are coming out now provide much higher nutrient value and forage for wildlife such as deer that are now going to be able to come into this area and better utilize it.
At this point, then, the land management plans are discussed for the next burn, later this fall, next year, or several years from this point. Water, wildlife, range improvement, reduction of fire hazard, improved air quality. It all adds up. In California, there is life through fire.